Hello everyone, you're about to see a pilot episode for Across the Pond, a new show which will be hosted on the Timcast channel, linked down in the description, every Saturday and Sunday. The premise is myself and my friend, Timcast IRL's Tate Brown, will discuss half an hour of American politics and half an hour of British politics to inform our audiences on our respective sides of the Atlantic what's happening on the other. This week we discussed how immigration has ruined politics in Minneapolis, and the number of migrant crimes going on in Britain, as well as the breakdown of the Islamo-Left alliance on camera during the march in Whitechapel. Then on Sundays we will be joined by a guest usually pulled from the Anglosphere on X, including famous faces and even some anons, to discuss some evergreen topics. This coming Sunday we'll be joined by Patrick Casey to talk about whether or not dating is a disaster for young men, the revival of Christianity among Gen Z, and why red pill influencers code third world. For this episode, because we're idiots, we forgot to record the video on Riverside, so you'll just have to put up with the animation and the audio, but I hope the content and its quality speaks for itself. Again, next Saturday and Sunday, you can watch the full episodes on the Timcast channel linked down in the description. But for now, let me know what you think of the show down in the comments, and enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tate Brown here holding it down. I'm bringing you a new weekend presentation for the Culture War channel. We are doing this. I got Connor Tomlinson. He is the GOAT. I would say he is the Don from across the pond. We're going to discuss all things American and British news. We're going to combine it into one. I don't know if this has ever been done before. This is really pioneering here. So, with this new show presentation idea, whatever we're going to call it, it's happening every weekend here on the Culture War channel. So, look, this is going to be really exciting stuff. I'm excited to see how this develops. The working name we have right now is Across the Pond. I think this is going to be something that really can be a legacy piece. This is going to set the tone for media, conservative media going forward. With that, I am joined by my guest, co-host, Connor Tomlinson. How is it going, man?
Good, sir, but one of us is going to have to change, because we're recording this on Halloween, and I decided to go as the only white guy left in London, which is a very scary prospect, of course, but it turns out we both went as Arthur.
Yeah, there's a bit of an aesthetic sort of choice here. Well, I was thinking, Reformation Day. I'm assuming this is probably your favorite holiday on the calendar. So, I kind of wanted to give a bit of a collar look, maybe sort of like a old Anglican or Presbyterian sort of deal. And I know you're fired up about Reformation Day, so.
Yeah, well, you're probably yet again the only eligible male to be an Anglican priest at this point, because I don't know if you've seen the new Archbishop of Canterbury, but she is a female priest, which should be a contradiction in terms, who in 2018 said, "My role in the church is subversive." And it's like, yeah, I believe you. As far as the format of the show, I don't know if anyone is plugged into UK politics from the side of the US, where they watch these abject slop shows where politicians who used to be on different sides of the aisle to one another, or journalists who were meant to hold politicians to account and were calling them the Antichrist only a few months ago, have now started podcasts that are sort of quirky and where, well, we always used to be on opposite sides and we might slightly disagree when actually they agree on everything. Instead, we're being honest about our marketing. We're on different sides of the Atlantic, but we agree on everything. You're all going back. So that's just the selling point of the show.
Yeah, mass deportations is the one thing that brings everyone together and sort of rectifies the rift that was caused in the Revolutionary War. I think it's a beautiful thing. With that, we got some really tremendous stories here that we're going to discuss. So I think the way the format's going to work, we're going to do 30 minutes American-centric news, 30 minutes British-centric news, and an hour of blackpilling. I think that's ultimately what's going to be occurring here. But I don't know. Before we get started, stateside, I think we're kind of flying high. We're feeling a little confident with the future outlook of our country. The conservative movement, obviously, there's some rifts, there's some infighting. But generally speaking, things are moving in the right direction, I would say. We're moving the football down the field. But, things obviously seem to be a bit different on your side of the pond. I don't know how you're feeling. I don't know if you're black-pilled or not.
Well, optimism is a Christian virtue, hope is, and so I'm allowed not to be optimistic. I think the virtue of this show will be that UK politics has always been of interest to Americans because we are seen as the fallen motherland. And at this point in our history, we're at the midpoint between a Islamic caliphate and a dysfunctional near to post-Soviet state. We're wondering which one is going to win out. Something we're probably going to discuss later with the Islamo-Leftist alliance in the UK breaking down in real time. And so it's useful to get dispatches from within the sort of island-sized gulag that the UK has become. As far as my pessimism, I mean, we recently got news that, again, the net migration numbers, 818,000 estimated total migration, net migration about 400,000. Reminder, we're a country the size of New York State, and we have about the level of legal migration that you guys do every single year, including about 250,000 Indians every year, which I know JD Vance is probably feeling pretty smarting right now after his recent Q&A on the Turning Point tour. That was totally insufferable. Online Indians and their consequences have been a disaster for international relations, it turns out. We just had our Chancellor, she's about to give a budget basically saying how they're going to break manifesto pledges and put taxes up yet again and chase even more millionaires out of the country than communist China is losing right now, despite having seeming to just break rules regarding renting out her home property that she supported all the way back in 2020. So we're going like full car and harem syndrome in the Soviet Union right now, of where we've got anarcho-tyranny with our tax law, with our censorship codes, with letting prisoners out of prison early if they're violent offenders, but throwing mothers in prison for deleted tweets. And all of our politicians are just like violating the tax laws that they're setting, because the purpose is, of course, to extract money out of you while they live the high life, because they couldn't have any other job because they're total midwits who couldn't make it in the market. So
I think this would be good. I think there's obviously there's been a long-standing interest specifically in Britain from Americans. I mean, I think the fact that to a degree we seem to be more clued into royal news than the British themselves kind of indicates that. I mean, Harry is in the spotlight way too much here. You can't call him Prince Harry anymore. They're taking that title away from him, thankfully.
Well, they're taking it away from Andrew as well because of all the Jeffrey Epstein stuff.
We're not going to have many princes left after all this, but
so my prediction is actually there was a massive piece in a left-wing rag called The New Statesman, who are famous for mistreating an interview with Roger Scruton, and then the Douglas Murray had to procure the tapes to clear his name, which is ironic because the Spectator are basically treating me the same way these days, so what goes around comes around. But there was a piece basically saying abolish the monarchy, but the argument wasn't necessarily to abolish the institution. I mean, you could read it that way, but the argument was that the House of Windsor itself, even Queen Elizabeth II, who presided over the mass replacement migration experiment and didn't intervene, and also who gave her son Prince Andrew, no longer Prince, as it turns out, he's going to get his titles taken away, £1 million stipend a year, 500,000 of which he spent on a PR firm to discredit the now deceased under suspicious circumstances Virginia Giuffre, and then paid a £12 million settlement in 2022, which seems to have been sourced from the royal estate, which means, the British taxpayer, by and large. All of that moral corruption is sort of swimming around the current royals, and so they're trying to appease the more diverse diaspora of Gen Z who would rather a caliphate than a monarchy, or the growing left-wing contingent that are just full-blown Republicans, and not in the capital R party sense, as in the we want a gay race communist bureaucracy sense. And then, at the same time, the people that actually want an institutional monarchy see them as unwilling to enact the sovereign decision-making capacity that is vested in them, that has always been vested in England, in England's kings. Charles said that the monarchy is the most stable form of governance back in 1981, but what he means is it enforces institutional neutrality, or at least the pretense of neutrality, from the top down. So, Oran McIntyre is currently trying to tear his brain out of his head because of the misconception there, the breaking of Schmidt's concept of authority, that neutrality is the lie that papers over the cracks of deep and irreconcilable divisions. And so the monarchy just no longer has any legitimacy. And so to save the monarchy, what we might have to do is just replace the House of Windsor. And it's not like it's the first time that a King Charles has been deposed in order to save England's institutions, so we have precedent for it.
It's true. I mean, look, Harold Godwinson, I think we could probably trace his lineage. They're out there somewhere. He's probably in New Zealand at this point. But I think maybe a pre-Norman arrangement would be favorable for the future of the United Kingdom. I would like to see that very much. I don't know. Probably in America. It's probably somewhere in Arkansas. The heir to the Godwinson throne. He's probably just some linebacker playing for Arkansas right now. If I had to guess, that just seems
like. You telling me he's not sub-Saharan African, Tate? Really?
Yeah. But speaking of African, we have this story's been all over X recently. I think we're gonna feed a lot of these current events through X. I think that's where a lot of the discourse is happening. That's where a lot of actions that the White House is making is getting fed down through the Twitters of all these staffers. It's actually a really tremendous thing. I don't know if you saw this, but there's been a lot of documentation out of Minneapolis. It's becoming a stronghold for the Somali diaspora. There is a video that popped up that was doing the rounds here of what appears to be a Somali political rally. I guess that would be, for lack of a better word, what you would call this. I'm just going to play this real quick, and the audience at home can determine what would you think the founding fathers' response to this would be. So I'm going to play this clip here.
Congresswoman Shane.
Yeah.
Sida raga soo wada baxnay. Haddaba Umar waa ka xumahayo. Virginia qaboobaa lagu dhalay. Laakiinse waan adopt gareynay. Sidarna wax badan ma joogine.
So obviously what we see here, there's an angry lady in a hoodie. I don't know, hijab, I think is what they call these things. She's wearing a hoodie. She's speaking some sort of Star Wars language. It's really tough to sort of figure out what was going on there. All this to say, they need to go. They got to go back. And I can pull up here the massive overhaul that's taken place in Minneapolis. Just in not even a lifetime of a young person, this would be the case. We look here in 1980, the census was saying 87% white European. Down to 2021, we see 62%, and a massive increase in the black population. Now, obviously, this isn't your sort of heritage American, black Americans that, have been here for hundreds of years or so. This is primarily driven by Somali refugees and their descendants, and they've just been dropped. First of all, I'm wondering why Minneapolis was selected as the location. I don't think anyone would assimilate properly with their winters they have there. But
to be fair, I imagine with the high rates of cousin marriage in Somalia that dyslexia is pretty common, and so they might have thought it was misspelled as Mogadishu. Fun fact, by the way, I've spoken to an academic called Patrick Nash who wrote the case for banning cousin marriage in an Oxford journal, and he tallied up the various cousin marriage rates across the Islamic world. It's like 90% in Afghanistan, which explains why they're the ethnicity in America that's most likely to claim SNAP benefits. I'm sure, depriving it from all of those morbidly obese and desperately in need black women. But it turns out Somalia is such a failed and dysfunctional state that they can't actually record the rates of cousin marriage. You kind of just have to eyeball it with the fact that they all look like each other.
Yeah. I was doing a deep dive recently. I was actually trying to determine what the precise inbreeding rate was in Somalia. And like you said, there's hard data from a variety of countries across the Middle East and North Africa. But Somalia, the only thing we really had to go off of was a study that was conducted in 2004 by just an autistic guy. And even he just gave a vague estimate. I think it was fairly high. That just kind of says it all, that there's not even a bureau in Somalia that you would be able to utilize to determine any sort of accurate information on the people that live there. And the leadership here in the United States is that's what we need. We need Somalis here to enrich us. I mean, it's a very, very noble goal. I have another clip here from Omar Fateh, I think is how you say his name. This was him giving a rally. He is a favorite now for the mayor of Minneapolis. And here is a video of him from a rally, rallying up the American people here. You can see here he's really appealing to our sensibilities. I'll play the clip.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Somalia. Hiran State. Macawisle. Early voting was hadda illa November 4. I need your vote. I need you. Hadan udkina hello. We're gonna win.
So this guy, how can you? My question to anybody at this point who is still latched on to the immigration as our strength, and I'm gonna speak here to well-minded individuals, well-meaning individuals. This is just because this guy was born in the States. I think he was born in Baltimore or DC. He was born around here, and you see this, and this is just failed assimilation. He's 30-something years old, and he's appealing to an ethnic bloc that his parents came here from. And you contrast this with the previous waves of immigration that came to the United States, which had a variety of problems in and of themselves, but they were coming from Germany, Ireland, Italy, these countries who culturally obviously would be a bit more similar to the United States. And it took decades for them to assimilate. It took a world war. It took 2 world wars. Here, you're bringing in a vastly different group of people, really have nothing in common with the West largely, specifically the United States. And yeah, this is kind of what you get. You kind of just get a guy, again, speaking a Star Wars language, saying a bunch of things I don't understand, but it sounds like they want to kill me. That's kind of what it sounds like, I would say. And yeah, he doesn't need to appeal to the American voter anymore because a different electorate has been brought into Minneapolis.
Yeah, I can't wait for the pod racing that's going to go through the streets of Minneapolis. I mean, look, if you time travel back to 1776 and showed this to George Washington, he'd tie you to a log and toss you into the Potomac because he'd think that you were wishing irreparable demographic vandalism on your country. And unfortunately, all of these various pockets of where the third world, out of either habit or spite, are just recreating the conditions of their failed homelands, is proof that culture and electoral outcomes is reliably downstream of demographics. Same thing with New York, right? Mamdani is on the precipice of becoming, much like London, the Islamic gay race communist mayor of one of the largest cities, most notable landmarks in the world. And it's purely because of ethnic resentment from outsiders. Like I quote retweeted the video that you're talking about where he's waving the flag of Somalia that now conspicuously looks like the Minnesota state flag, by the way. And I just said, a lot of people, yes, if you want to talk about the people that originally formulated the ideas like the Nation of Immigrants and the Hart-Celler Act and left modernism that brought them here, yes, those people were acting under blank slate liberalism, neo-Marxism, postmodernism, etc. But these guys are not a result of Marxism or neoliberalism or postmodernism, or even like a deeply entrenched desire to see the promises of Islamic scripture realized with the return of a 7th century caliphate. This is just thousands of years of cousin marriage causing low IQ, low impulse control, and resulting in a politics that is as simple as, I hate white people, I want to take their stuff and give it to my co-ethnics. And you don't really need to rotate many apples in your mind to get your own head around that retarded way of doing politics. Just understand that they want to kill you because you're a different skin color to them. It's just pure like ethnic tribalism. They want to build a road to their dad's house, and if they can't, they'll just tear up the tarmac on yours. So just don't bring any of these people in. Like as you said, the Italians, the Jews, the Irish, yeah, there were problems when they came over, and they're broadly European, or at least have some like shared biblical ancestry that they can appeal to, especially, you know, when AIPAC's giving out donations. And so even then, we got like cool mob movies out of it, but there was a lot of organized crime, and there was a lot of ethnic colonization of various neighborhoods. And this time around, think of the food just isn't a persuasive enough argument to turn an entire American state into a set of Black Hawk Down.
Yeah. I mean, what even is Somali food? I mean, I've seen Ethiopian food. I've sampled it previously, and it's just like powders on like a easel. Like it's the weirdest.
Did you see the photo that the Roaring Nationalist tweeted out a little while ago of Ethiopian food on a plate? And I genuinely thought that weird bit of sponge bread was like a ceiling tile. Like what the?
Right. Yeah. It's. I mean, RFK, poor guy. He had to probably see that, and it's probably just caused tremendous amount of pain and trauma for him.
Give me the GMOs instead.
Yeah, what is going on in Ethiopia? That was a Bill Clinton. I gotta work. I gotta get the RFK. I gotta get in the mood for the
probably
RFK.
Knows what's going on in Ethiopia. I'm pretty sure the Clinton Foundation has an outpost there, and it's up to no good.
Yeah. But yeah, like you're saying, I mean, with Zoran, I've made this point previously on the show, is he's not animated by Islam. He's not animated by socialism, although these are obviously intrinsic parts of his platform. The thing that primarily motivates him, he said out loud, there's a piece publication, I don't know what you would call it, that he wrote in college describing his experience dating white women, and he was really grieving over the rejection that commonly would follow sort of a dating proposal to white women. And I think that actually hits at what's kind of going on here with the Zoran types, with the Ilhan Omar types, because I don't think if anyone is seriously considering what an outcome of those sort of administrations would look like, I don't think we would see Sharia law. I think we would see Brazil or South Africa. I think that would be the more likely thing. Yeah. Yeah, Camp of the Saints. And so, yeah, what it gets at is like people are, looking down Zoran's proposals for New York City, and they're pulling their hair out. Like, none of this is cohesive. None of the numbers are, the math's not mathing, these sorts of things. But that's the point. Like, the point is vindictiveness. The point is revenge against the core population of the United States. I mean, again, like I point back to with his getting rejected by white women, that those kinds of things, those kinds of inaccess to that core population breed resentment. And that certainly occurs in the third world, and that sort of mentality. I mean, look, you can see video after video of people still harping on about, colonization. They're attributing all the failures of their people to whatever European empire colonized them. It really just stems from resentment. That's the primary ethos driving Omar Fateh or whatever, driving Zoran Mamdani. It's resentment.
Yeah, diversity is your strength until it's your punishment. I mean, you get a lot of that sort of posting from online Indians who have come along and sort of wised up to the influence that Anon accounts have had in the Anglosphere, and now you get accounts like Desi King, who keeps posting about Wignats and how white women secretly want to sleep with men from the subcontinent with weaker grip strength than them. And I also had to point out to him that the only reason that London is now like the rape capital of the world is because Indians are the largest gross perpetrators of that sexual assault. Bad news for you, buddy. But when you said about Zoran Mandami writing about the op-ed, did you know that Hassan Piker actually wrote a similar op-ed where he said that there's like a phrase in Turkey that there's this common misconception that white girls are up for it. This is a similar perception across the Muslim world, by the way. In the early caliphs, they would go looking for, quote, the people of yellow, basically like fair-haired, white-skinned women. It's why they would abduct Europeans and especially English people from the Cornish coast, the Barbary slavers, that abducted like 250,000 English people and sold them into slavery. That was the original reason for the Crusades, to go and get the kids back. It's also why Thomas Jefferson declared war on the Barbary pirates and would be appalled that a single Muslim was even in America, frankly. But Hassan wrote that he only came over to America because he thought that white women were willing and up for it, and then he had like sex on a staircase and like hurt his back and got clawed to death, and thought, yeah, this is great, I'm a total disgusting reprobate, let's do more of this. So there is this persistent insistence that the third world should have a human right to have access to white people, whether it's because of their wealth or whether it's because of their women, and we should just say no to these people. Like, these people have obvious predatory intent that they broadcast before they come over here. One of the major things that happened in the last couple of years were all the guys that are like hopping on boats from France and breaking into Britain like they're Viking marauders. Ahead of time, I broke this story in 2023. There are North African people trafficking accounts that put up videos of burning down churches and breaking under border fences and boarding in boats, intercut with footage of women on nights out dressed immodestly by Muslim standards, filmed without their knowledge in London, Manchester, and all across Europe. And the advertisement is basically, look at all these white women that are willing and able. If you, enterprising young Muslim man, pay a people smuggler via Hawala Finance a few £1,000s to drag you across Europe, then you could be a Deliveroo driver by nightfall and you could have 10 white wives by the time you reach London. And this just results in loads of rapes because they truly believe this stuff. And it also results in the kind of resentful ethnopolitics that has propelled Omar Fateh to power, because he's got an entire Somali ethnic clan voting bloc structure in Minnesota. Like, they're not voting for Ilhan Omar because of her tax policy. They're voting for her Kishti Somali. And it's why Zoran Mandami has now got a coalition of the resentful who haven't read The Wretched of the Earth, but they don't need to because, killing white people and colonists is just a second impulse to them. And he's been propelled not because of his outstanding policies like nationalizing grocery stores and stealing land from white people to make housing more affordable. It's just because he's going to steal the stuff from the white people. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I mean, back to what you were saying earlier, like, people always point to Thomas Jefferson buying a Quran as like example of sort of this utopia that leftists sort of think that the founders had in mind of like this multi-ethnic, multi-religious utopia. All that really happened was Jefferson bought a Quran, thumbed through it, and then declared war on Libya. He was like, no, like enough of this.
I'm the same. Like, sorry, the amount of hadiths I've had to pour over in the last couple of years to understand what's going on in my country. Like, I should never have to speak this Tuscan Raider dialect in
Yeah.
order to understand my own domestic politics. But unfortunately, I have to read up on the history of Middle Eastern politics just to understand why London looks like Islamabad, and I have to wander through Middle Eastern PvP servers to get to work.
Yeah, exactly. When I hear the name Mamdani is mayor of New York City, I should assume that's a weird Italian name, but it checks out. But I mean, what we're getting at here is I think the reason a lot of well-meaning people are concerned with, let's just say Mamdani specifically, they are fearful that he's going to introduce Sharia law. They're fearful that he's going to create sort of this socialist, system or whatever. But what we're getting at is the reality is far worse, is that he's going to, again, just kind of South Africanize New York City. And I think part of the reason people can't quite grasp the really nasty undertone to everything, which is resentment, is Gabe Gorderini. He put up a post that's been doing the rounds. This was obviously in response to the Tucker Heritage sort of thing. The Heritage Foundation sticking with Tucker. But he put William F. Buckley lost, Patrick J. Buchanan won. And I think that's really poignant because I think a lot of people looking at Mamdani and they're not quite able to prescribe what's going on there, same with Ilhan Omar, et cetera, is because they still assume that voters in New York City are voting based off of like who they think would run the city the best. They don't like Jack Posobiec put up a post and it's very salient. It was something along the lines of elections are you're no longer voting on policy. It's just a census, right? It's just assessing what the demographic makeup is of New York City. As some people will say, well, white leftists sort of pushed Mamdani past the finish line in the Democrat primary. That is true, but that's I think a little bit separate. That's more related to some unique New York City dynamics. But broadly speaking, the fact that a Zoran exists, A, indicates a failed immigration policy, but B, indicates what we're getting at. We're getting at, no, this what's being bred here is resentment towards white Americans specifically, and that needs to be emphasized, because if we don't emphasize that, we're never going to properly diagnose the issue, which is mass migration overhauling the makeup of the United States.
Yeah, so obviously the Fusionist Coalition pushed out a lot of the paleocons and the immigration critics. And you saw the similar thing in the 90s as well, when some of the writers like Sam Francis or Peter Brimlow were just pushed out of the Conservative Coalition for saying some fairly spicy things, admittedly, but for having some salient understanding about how American conservative politics operated on the grounds of being beautiful losers because they constrained themselves by principles their enemies did not operate using, ended up cancelling their own side, and then resulted in, mass replacement migration and becoming a third world state. And so they should have listened to those warnings at the time, and then you wouldn't have Zoran Mamdani. In the UK context, so a lot of the conservative politicians that have inflicted mass migration on my country often like citing Roger Scruton. And look, I've read some of Scruton's books. He has some interesting observations about everything from art to aesthetics to why the excesses of markets can lead to an erosion of your culture. But one of his most salient points was the oikos, the Greek word for home, precedes the economy. That's the etymology of it. And the love of home is the foundation for the defense of the state. So oikophilia is healthy. Oikophobia is what most of our liberal elites practice. And in order to be oikophilic, you have to settle the question of a pre-political we in order to make political decisions on behalf of that constituency. Because all politics is actually identity politics. You identify a set constituency with interests, and in order to debate the interests between competing parties on the grounds of policy, you have to have a shared and cohesive identity in order to have that discussion. So if you destroy the pre-political we by turning us into a set of competing tribes with different levels of ethno-narcissism, by the way, because the Anglo diaspora and the English themselves in their own country are much more individualistic. We're much more take people as we meet them. But then other nations, other ethnicities, other cultures, and especially religions are a lot more tribalistic. They only extend moral consideration out as far as their family and their clan and how much stuff they can get. Then you fracture the pre-political we, and you turn politics into the scrabbling over resources that we see in African kingdoms, or the mad dash to expropriate property and wealth from one ruling class to another that we saw in the breakdown of colonialism in the likes of Rhodesia or in Kenya, where African dictators rose up and, despite apparently sharing the identity of oppressed and colonized peoples with the Indian administrators that worked for the empire, persecuted them just as badly as they did the Brits. So all you can do is just shut your borders to these people who will never assimilate into your civilization. They're not interested in doing so. They self-segregate in ethnic enclaves, and then when they reach a demographic tipping point, they exert democratic pressure to become a one-party state. Mm-hmm. The only thing you can do is just stop these people from coming in, because they're never going to be as American or as British as you and me, because they don't share any of the priors that made our countries possible in the first place, and they're not listening to your arguments on policy lines. They just want to take your stuff and see you dead.
Right, yeah, like, handing out pocketbook constitutions. It's tough to override sort of this resentment that exists. I mean, Pat Buchanan, going back to that initial post, outlined this very clearly in a few books, but, Death of the West is the book that everybody sort of cites when they're speaking about Pat Buchanan's view of immigration policy. And I just get the sense is like, if he won in 1992, we probably could have just put a lid on everything. We'd be fine right now. I mean, that's kind of the takeaway I have. Now that Trump's in, obviously this happens 25 years later. The way to undo all of this, the route forward is much, much tougher. I mean, that's why, people are really, hard on ICE and DHS and whatnot with the deportation numbers. It's like, look, reorienting our immigration policy from get in as many people as possible to get out as many people as possible takes time. It takes a considerable amount of time, considerable amount of resources. But I understand the frustration, because I think a lot of people feel like we're kind of out of time to some degree. I mean, if you walk into a Costco, it's a total disaster. It looks like a bazaar. Like it's absolutely
like a scene from Temple of Doom.
Right. Yeah, like the Temple of Doom. And so I think this is really, it's a really salient. I mean, obviously Trump had a scuffle with Buchanan back in the day when Trump was in the Reform Party in the United States. But it's nice to see people now, it's a mainstream now to give Buchanan his flowers. I mean, and a bit too late to some degree, but it's good that it's happening now. But yeah, I think people sort of need to really conceptualize the message that he was trying to, shake the conservative base and get into their heads of like, hey, these people don't have goodwill. They don't have good intentions. They are here, like you said, to replace and then ensure that your avenues to power are completely eliminated in perpetuity. So there's no question about it.
I would say perhaps my final reflection on this is that if we to ask Buchanan, I bet his greatest regret would have been endorsing George Bush Sr. in the presidential race, because it then led, of course, to George Bush Jr. as well. And George Bush Sr. was a liberal internationalist. George Bush Jr. had even less of an excuse than his father to be so, but he was very pro-migrant. And both our mutual Oren McIntyre and my friend Nathan Pinkowski have given great speeches about this, both at NatCon and done a podcast on this recently, saying that in the aftermath of 9/11, Muslim migration skyrocketed, and there's no conceivable reason other than they were subjected to a naive sales pitch by Dawa activists to say Islam is actually the religion of peace rather than the submission, and it's this total aberration, this political Islam or Islamism, which presumably makes the Prophet Muhammad himself an Islamist by that definition, that has contorted Islam into terrorism. And if you import us, don't worry, we won't set up Dearborn Michigans or segregated enclaves in Texas where we'll blast the guttural call to prayer 5 times away. No, we'll be just as American as you and me. And that has been a great lie. And now the US needs to realize not only is it not a propositional nation, it's, as Senator Eric Schmidt has said at NACON, descended from a distinct people. You know,
Right.
the Anglos, the Scotch-Irish, and yes, Black Americans who were brought over didn't participate in the founding, but are indigenous to the American project. But also, even if you think you are a propositional nation, enforce the bloody proposition. Like, if people violate their oath of office and show loyalty to another principality, or if they are preaching a religion that is antithetical to the founding, because Congress may not recognize an establishment of a state religion, but it certainly had state churches at the time that the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights was written, then if people are incompatible with that, just don't let them in and kick them out. And this is why it's quite encouraging. One thing I will say is I noticed the State Department is gradually reducing the number of refugees admitted to the United States.
Yes.
It's brought it down to 7,500 a year, which people might think are high, but they've said specifically it's going to be like white Afrikaners from South Africa who are actually persecuted by anti-white race communism over there. So if you guys are only taking in basically the Anglosphere diaspora, almost like an Israeli right of return policy, that's good. It shows their priorities are in the right direction. They just need to accelerate the timeline at which they kick all the incompatible people out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like you said with George Bush following 9/11, he had the mandate to do literally anything. I mean, you look at his approval rating; it was like 92% following the attacks. Yeah, that would have been the great time to reassess. Maybe this propositional nation experiment has failed in many ways. Yeah, and then like you said, I mean, it's really important with the sort of reorientation, the ideological reorientation that's occurring in the conservative movement. It sets the tone with the refugee sort of restructuring, the fact that they're prioritizing people who would easily assimilate into the United States, A, and then B, prioritizing people that are actually oppressed. I mean, like asylum was granted if your country just like sucked before, like, oh, I'm from Guatemala, great, what's your strife? I just can't really get a job. It's like, yeah, it's Guatemala. That's Guatemalan is that way because of Guatemalans. Like, it's not a complicated math problem. But with that, we are at the half-hour mark. We do need to shift gears to the UK, the situation in the UK. Now, I was looking, we were putting together some of these stories we're going to talk about. The migrant crime situation in the United Kingdom it's completely out of control, obviously, but it's even something that's a bit foreign to Americans. Because I mean, yes, we have these ethnic blocks that are emerging in the United States, etc. But it's really pronounced in the UK. Because we have a lot of domestic crime. We're a rowdy bunch, you know. So I don't know if maybe these things just fall through the cracks. But the UK, which was a fairly peaceful country prior to the mass migration, the world's refuse being dumped on the island, was relatively peaceful. It was a relatively peaceful place, and that's why these stories are so shocking. And every time, it's funny. The BBC here. I'm reading this article. Afghan man held after dog walker dies in stabbing. It's like pulling teeth to get them to actually admit where these people are from. Like oftentimes, I read these headlines coming out of the UK, and they'll just say "man," No,
whatever. originally it did say "man," and then I quote retweeted it and ratioed the BBC, and they stealth edited it.
Yeah, I mean, the stealth editing is also really nasty. That's a whole other thing. Tim can speak at that at length. But yeah, it's just story after story, just from the BBC as well. Afghan man in court after man dies in knife attack. Again, even then, okay, they admitted that it's an Afghan, but in the headline it still provides a bit of plausible deniability. Afghan man in court after a man died in knife attack. Are they related? I don't know. But
the dagger just floated through the air like a scene from Macbeth. I mean,
yeah.
This happens every day. Like we've just come off of the prospect of fake refugees entering the US. The UK is much worse. So we have entrenched in our domestic law the rule of foreign courts. So in 1998, Tony Blair, who is increasingly looking like the painting from Ghostbusters 2, I think the sin is really weighing on his conscience, encoded within British law via the Human Rights Act, which our current Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrote the textbook for lawyers on how to apply it. So he's not going to repeal it. He wrote that we are subject to the jurisdiction of the European Convention and therefore Court of Human Rights. It was set up in 1951 as basically a measure to prevent Dutch Jews fleeing the Holocaust on the Kindertransport from being turned away, which some of them were, and now applies to like North African rapists and Afghan terrorists. Yeah. And so this guy broke into the country in 2020 on the back of a lorry from France and was granted indefinite right to remain in 2022. All of this happened under the Boris Johnson government. Obviously, Boris Johnson famous for the Boris wave. After Brexit, when everyone who voted for Brexit had their principal concern as being reducing or ending mass migration and even reversing it now, Boris Johnson decided to, rather than have a few 100,000 European plumbers and Polish builders come in every year, have 1 million third worlders come in every year. Like 80% or more were from India, Pakistan, and Nigeria, and a few thousand Chinese students as well that, you know, come and go but still compromise our university and security system. And so we had 4 million immigrants in 4 years, including 250,000 Indians. And it just so happened that the Home Secretary and the Chancellor at the time were themselves Indian. The Chancellor, who ended up becoming the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, had in 2014 written a paper about why the Conservative Party should import more Indians because they'll vote Conservative. I'm sure it had nothing to do with him celebrating Diwali in Downing Street. And the Home Secretary had called Indian immigrants living bridges, a term used by Prime Minister Modi to describe diasporas and how they use their demographic volume to then exert democratic pressure in foreign countries to advantage India and send back remittances and give India favoured nation status. So all this happened in Boris Johnson's time. The murder happened in Boris Johnson's constituency. As George Lucas would say, it's like poetry, right? It rhymes. So what ended up happening was this Afghan in question, Safi Dawood, which is a good British name, of course, got in a fight with a 45-year-old man called Shahzad Farouk and a 14-year-old boy who obviously hasn't been
two
named as a
Anglo
child.
people here, obviously. Just
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, basically foreigners who never needed to be here in the first place. And the one guy who intervened telling Mr. Dawood to drop the knife was a guy called Wayne Broadhurst, who was just out walking his dog. He's a bin man, he's a garbage man, so he's sort of pillar of his community, keeps it clean, etc. He's beloved family man, and he dies. He dies being stabbed in the street while people watch and film from their windows like he's Kitty Genovese. And the police then taser this Afghan, who is now going to be living in prison in conditions funded by the British taxpayer that are better than in his homeland. And this is just a consistent trend. Like, there was a guy called Mohammed Shark the other day who got 16 months in prison for trying to strangle a railway worker to death when a woman had asked him, does he have his ticket? Because he'd boarded a train to Birmingham without paying. Now, 16 months is half the sentence of what Lucy Comley got, the mother who famously was imprisoned for a deleted tweet last summer. So if you send a bad tweet about migrants, you get twice the sentence of someone trying to strangle someone to death who should never be in the country in the first place. There was an Egyptian guy who killed his ethnically British wife. He stabbed her to death. He's just been sent to prison. There was a Sudanese migrant who literally has the dead-eyed stare of remorseless, low IQ, I don't understand how other people exist, called Deng Chong Majek. And he stabbed a hotel worker called Rhiannon Sky White to death by stabbing her in the skull 19 times with a screwdriver after he stalked her home to a train station because she had the temerity to intervene in an argument he had with another migrant in the hotel over a packet of biscuits. He then went in his blood-stained clothes to a corner store, bought a bunch of alcohol and had a party in his bedroom, and was shocked when the police turned up because he thought the police lights were disco lights. Like, these are the people that we have to pay our taxes to put in hotels. I don't know, do you remember the migrant hotels that we discussed, migrant hotel protests we discussed when I was on Timcast around the summer? So the guy that sparked that, this is insane, right? The guy was called Hadush Kabatu. He is an Ethiopian. He broke into the country, and after 8 days, he tried to sexually assault a 14-year-old schoolgirl in uniform, as well as harassing a couple of other women. He then lied about the assault, and the judge said he is of good character because he didn't commit any other offences while he was here. He was here for 8 days and he broke into the country, but there you go, right? He then gets convicted for the assault. The police let him go by accident because they were meant to give him to someone to be deported, and they didn't have anyone with the handoff. He actually went back to the prison and he was like, am I meant to be locked up? And then they turned him away. So he decided to stumble around London finding other Africans to give him directions and money for the train, run errands, just like walking around like Mr. Bean, blissfully unaware that there is a manhunt going on for him for 2 days, and he's apprehended in a park. He actually asks to be deported because he's depressed. And then the government go, right, we deported him the next day. This is a win for us. And then it comes out they paid him £500 to leave. That is a year's salary in his country. So in my country, if you break into the country by going across all of Europe, committing a bunch of crimes, arriving here, trying to rape a schoolgirl, then you will be arrested by the police, given a light sentence, let free by accident, and then paid a year's salary to piss off. Like, dude, that is the message that is being sent by our government.
It's the only most charitable interpretation of that is hostility towards the native English. That's the only, and the Welsh and Scottish by extent. But I mean, is it worth relitigating Brexit? I mean, Brexit happened because people were increasingly frustrated with, I mean, presumably among other things, displacement. And like you pointed out, the primary source of immigration was like Poland, was like Lithuania, Italy, Romania, and the response from the British government is like, okay, yeah, we'll grant that. And then, yeah, you just flood the country with millions and millions of people from countries you've never heard of in your entire life. And I don't know how else to assess that other than open hostility towards the native population of Britain.
The most Brexit voting areas were the areas where Londoners had conducted white flight to, so including places like, Clacton and Southend. Clacton is the constituency that Nigel Farage just won, by the way. It's the most anti-immigration constituency in the country. 90% of all constituencies in the country want to see net migration lowered, and that's when they underestimate it by a factor of 10. Most people think migration is running at 70,000 a year, not at least 700,000 a year. And even then, they want it stopped and reversed, lots of people sent home. They also think that more people are illegal than legal. So the British public don't understand the problem in logistical terms, but they just know that they walk outside, they see a bunch of strangers, they know they're paying for them, they know they're committing crimes, and they want them sent back. So the areas that voted Brexit are on the periphery of Birmingham, they're in the north where the rape gang scandal has happened, they're in the southeast where the Cockneys have been moved out to Essex and chased out of their historic areas. And the Cockneys are one of the oldest ethnic groups in the UK. So the fact that they've been dispossessed is drastic. So what ended up happening was they voted for Brexit. Nigel Farage campaigned for it, but he wasn't in Parliament at the time. The party in power was led by David Cameron, who then resigned, who then handed off to Theresa May, who was the Home Secretary that was basically gaslighting the entire public anytime there was a Muslim terror attack. She controlled the front pages of newspapers to have women in Union Jack hijabs anytime ISIS beheaded someone. Not making that up, by the way. She then dragged her feet on a Brexit deal. Trump couldn't stand her. If you go back and watch her old press conferences, he's standing next to her like she smells. She ended up stepping down because she nearly lost the election to Jeremy Corbyn, who is a demented third world communist. And then Boris Johnson came in 2019 and won a massive majority, including historically Labour areas who had voted for Brexit, because his entire campaign was get Brexit done. The problem is Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, the longest serving cabinet minister in the previous government, who's now the editor of The Spectator, who is the guy who has buried footage of my debate with him about immigration from last month. We don't know why, but we can only presume he's afraid his ideas don't stand up to scrutiny publicly, and who I've had to inform is in the hands of my lawyers now in order to deal with it. They decided that the nation hadn't voted to lower migration. They wanted global Britain. They wanted Singapore on Thames. But what they got, instead of Singapore in terms of flogging criminals and being orderly, what they got is this incoherent mess of different ethnicities that are all warring and then imposing a totalitarian state within its borders because it couldn't enforce its borders. And so Brexit was carried out by a bunch of globalist drones that only wanted to treat Britain like an economic zone, and who thought, oh, I know a nice Indian doctor, therefore all Indians must be doctors. And so brought in hundreds of thousands of Indians, and hey presto, the rape rate goes up and the average wages of Indians drops below that of Brits. And so Brexit was right in principle. It was just carried out by inveterate traitors. The only good thing is, the reason that we can't deport anyone at the moment is, yes, a lack of political will, but it's because Parliament isn't sovereign. The phrase "you can just do things" in America applies way more in Britain, because we've only had a Supreme Court since 2005. We can get rid of it if it's in a manifesto commitment, right? The only thing that acts as a backstop is the House of Lords can block legislation if it wasn't in the manifesto. So if you put it in your manifesto that you're going to scrap all of these bodies, repeal all these laws, Parliament becomes sovereign again and serves at the behest of the king, but the king basically rubber stamps on whatever Parliament wants to do anyway, because he wants to be seen as impartial. So if you repealed all these laws, you returned power to elected ministers, you got rid of the activist judiciary that are approving all these asylum deals and tried to block Brexit, then you could actually just do stuff, and it means that now that we're not in the EU, we can actually just control our own politics. So again, Brexit, right in principle, but led to a colossal betrayal for which people like Johnson and Gove should never be forgiven.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. People make this point when they're discussing Africa and the dysfunction in Africa, is they always make this point and they say, and they also make this with the Middle East, they'll make this point where they say, oh, well, the European colonizers just drew arbitrary borders without any regard for the tribes that were residing there previously. And hence the implication of that is, when you put tribes that really don't want anything to do with each other, or really just create a mess against their will, they go at it. And so that's how they sort of explain away, the massive civil wars that occur in these African countries, pretty much every year. And it's okay, so when it comes to Africa, they're in agreement that arbitrary borders, sort of involuntarily forcing groups to live next to each other, leads to civil strife. but then they're unable to apply that to the West. And I mean, it's just very, very, very bizarre that they'll grant that on one end. That's in social science textbooks and that sort of thing. Is like, yeah, multi-ethnic, multiculturalism doesn't work in Africa, but they're just so committed to the idea that it could succeed in the United Kingdom and the United States, and really across the West. And it's just so bizarre that, yeah, they're able to grant that on that end and then not grant it here. With what you're saying with Brexit, it does seem to me, and it's kind of the same thing with reform, where the gains reform is making. Does it not help push the football down the field, even if many times it's unproductive, counterproductive in many cases? Is there not something to be said about the fact that these sorts of cries for help that are made at the ballot box does indicate that the football is being pushed down the field, at least from the electorate?
It does, as long as they make good on their promises. So I have got some praise for reform in the last few weeks and months. I've always applied carrot and stick to reform because I've known I'm never going to be an MP and I exist outside the political system, so I may as well leverage my mysterious platform saying things that were obvious to my grandfather, but apparently everyone needs to hear now, to whip politicians who are absolute cowards into shape. So last year when Nigel Farage said, we're not going to do mass deportations, it's politically impossible, it's not my ambition, and then he threw Rupert Lowe out of the party in March for saying that and called mass deportations a dark and dangerous use of rhetoric. A couple of months ago he said we need mass deportations. Right. And they're only aiming for like 150,000 a year, but I think that's them setting expectations low and then over-delivering, because they've already said they're going to cut a deal with Bukele from El Salvador to detain our foreign prisoners, which we can actually do because we don't have a Supreme Court blocking it like you guys do, even if they're El Salvadorian citizens, which is madness. And also, I think given the capacity that our airports have, Heathrow, Gatwick, they service like 33 million people a year, we can stick a few rapists on a Ryanair flight and send them out to either the Ascension Islands or whatever third world shithole they came from, right? I think we can just do that. Recently as well, they've been rolling out an academic and a friend of mine called Matt Goodwin to do their wet work on mainstream media, and he had an excellent question time appearance last night where he just listed off all of the illegal migrant rapists and just foreign criminals that the government have been letting in and refusing to deport on the BBC Live. He also pointed out the grooming gang scandal in Bradford, like the area where I uncovered the data that they were hiding from an FOI request we got forwarded, that Pakistani men are overrepresented as a share of population between like 3 and 6 times the offending rate, and that's being generous. Like if you narrowed it down to the age ranges and that, it's even worse. It's just hard to wander through all of the muddied data we barely have in the UK. And they denied the inquiry in that area, even though we know it's going on. So credit to him for doing that. He'll probably be a future MP and policymaker. My friend James Orr, he was at my wedding. He was J.D. Vance's mentor, actually, before Vance had even entered the Senate. He's now leading point on reform in terms of policy and recruiting people. So even though, I wouldn't be able to be an MP because I couldn't keep my mouth shut, there'll be, like, our guys will be allowed on the inside, which is great. And they're hardlining on things like the Boris wave. So recently, Katie Lamb, who's like a shadow Home Office minister in the Conservative Party. The Conservatives still exist, by the way. You wouldn't know it because they're a dead entity. They're about to sell off like the furniture in the Carlton Club, their members' club for firewood, because they're just going to be underwater at the next election. They're going to collapse and they're barely going to exist. But Katie Lamb is one of the few good ones, because she was only elected last year, so she didn't have any of the baggage of the party from the 14 years before. And she came out and said, look, millions have to leave because we need to be a culturally coherent country. And her ancestors, I think her grandfather was a Dutch Jew who came over, and rather than be one of these left-wing Jews, Batya Unga Sargon said on Twitter the other day, built the American left, and it's like, yikes, that doesn't sound how you think. Right. She's instead going like, yeah, why would we want to recreate the conditions of Nazi Germany but with like vaguely Islamic aesthetics in the middle of London? No, thank you. So she said that. The party denounced her and said, no, we're not going to do that. Everyone that's come here legally is going to stay. Whereas Reform have said, no, the Boris wave are all going home. Like, we're removing their right to remain. They're having their legal status stripped. They're being deported because they were never invited in the first place. And we've got precedent to do this, by the way. Or if Reform are at this stage now, a couple of years out from the election, hopefully they can be nudged along by people like me who are giving them some encouragement. I'm at a Reform event in a couple of weeks with their like deputy leader and Matt Goodwin and that. And we're doing like a Q&A with the audience so I can hold them to account. One of the things we can do is it's actually easier for us to repeal citizenship grants than it is for you guys, because There was an ISIS bride called Shamima Begum who fled to Syria to get married and became like a Sharia enforcer witnessing beheadings. She was born in Bethnal Green, so she was a British citizen, but she could hypothetically have Bangladeshi citizenship because they have a by blood citizenship law. And so the Home Secretary at the time, himself a Pakistani, I love how like the ethnopolitics of the subcontinent are now dueling out in Britain. Great stuff. But he repealed her citizenship, saying it's not in the public good that she be allowed to return from the Syrian refugee camp she was living in. And it was upheld by the court because she wasn't stateless. So if we can cut deals with other countries, especially those that have a by-blood citizenship law, it means we can repeal the citizenship grants of, for example, the Pakistani rapists and their families who covered up the crimes, who have conveniently renounced their Pakistani citizenship in order to stay in Britain and not be deported. Like, we can just do all this, and hopefully, not just reform getting traction in the polls, moving the Overton window makes it possible, but them actually promising this will win them votes and then win them power.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like the initial failure to launch from reform on mass deportations was nudged along by Keir Starmer, out of all people, when he had his, what was the Island of Strangers speech. It's almost like reform realized, we're getting outflanked by labor on this. Like, we need to tighten ranks a little bit here. Beyond that, we were discussing earlier the reorientation of the conservative movement. Buchanan, sort of people kind of realizing like, he was right. I mean, I'm seeing here this it's kind of like a boomer mentality where they assumed that maybe Muslims just hadn't learned enough about British values and could still be salvaged as a group. And I'm seeing here this Islamic sort of alliance, is Islamic British or Islamic leftist alliance. Obviously, on the right, there was a lot of overtures to maybe try to appeal to Muslim voters, saying, they on some social issues they're conservative. Obviously, never was going to happen. But the left, they had this sort of coalition they were attempting to build with the new Islamic arrivals as well. But now we're seeing some cracks in that alliance, I guess you would call it, cracks in that rift. I'm seeing here Nick Tenconi. I'm not familiar with Nick Tenconi. Maybe you can break down specifically what is going on here. Why is this rift occurring in this so-called alliance?
So Nick was one of the co-founders of Turning Point UK's chapter, which never took off like the USA one did. It basically became a street protest movement, and Nick has continued his approach from TPUK by taking over UKIP. UKIP was Farage's old party that he led in order to get the Brexit referendum over the line. And then, a bit like all the parties that Farage has led and then left, he basically like farts and then lets the lift doors close behind him. And so UKIP was a major mess for a number of years. Nick has tried to rebrand it as a Christian nationalist party, which, hey, look, for my American friends, you guys can have that conversation. I think it, makes a lot more sense in a nation with a written constitution and a definite founding. Christian nationalism is an American import. We're already an established Christian country. The problem is that the church is just kind of shit. Anyway, but I don't want to disparage Nick. He's a nice chap. It's just UKIP seems to be, at the moment, a political pressure vehicle rather than a viable electoral party, because Reform is just going to win, and they don't have any candidates that are close to Parliament. But what Nick realizes that he can do is make a scene on camera and get our enemies to out themselves. And so he decided to do a peaceful march through Whitechapel to dispute the Islamic colonization of our country. And Whitechapel, for those who don't know, is literally like a Bangladeshi slum. Like, if you go on the census map, it's crazy. So if you hover over Whitechapel, 53.3% of Whitechapel residents in 2021, before the Boris wave, before more third world migrants came, were ethnically Bangladeshi. Like, the percentage that are white British is less than 20%. And obviously, like, that doesn't break down by first or second generation, etc. And we know that second generation Muslims are way more radical than the first as well, which is crazy. So he just went, right, well, this is clearly an ethnic colony set up in my country with the largest mosque, East London Mosque, in the country. So I'm going to walk through there and just say, no, it's still our country. And the police actually banned the march from taking place because they feared there were going to be physical violence. So they redirected them to Knightsbridge, which is like the wealthy area of London where, there's a bunch of Arab tourists that go there, but they don't really cause any trouble. They just go and buy perfume from Harrods with their 3 wives and piss off. So they walked through Knightsbridge instead. But even though the UKIP march wasn't there, the Muslim groups turned out in all black, in balaclavas, a bit like they did to fight the protesters after the Southport murder last summer. and they were chanting Takfir, Allahu Akbar. They were going through the streets saying, whose streets are streets, in the sort of cousin marriage inflection fashion. And there were a bunch of stand up to racism Socialist Worker Party protesters, which are government funded, by the way. They're funded by government funded unions, who turned out, some of them in violation of the protest ban, it turns out. And there's an amazing video that I put in the link there, Tate. I think it's the last one under the Islam Left Alliance breaks down. If you can open that and hit play, it's just delicious.
Oh my gosh.
No need for that. We're on the same side, bro. No, we're not. Yes, we are, bro.
Yeah, we are not on the same side, bro.
Yeah, it's like, we're on the same side, brother. No, we're not. Yes, we are, brother. No, we're not. It's like, yeah, you guys, much like the communists in Iran, are going to get a rude awakening when, if the caliphate is instantiated, you find yourselves on the wrong end of a crane.
Right.
And this is this entire video is symptomatic of the current political conversation in Britain. It's like third world savages wanting to turn my country into a caliphate, while the useful idiot communists help them do it and call everyone a racist if you don't want that, because they think they're going to get John Lennon's Imagine. And the native population who have always voted against it are literally nowhere in sight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're the ones told by the police they can't be in the area.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is great from Nick to try and confront this. I mean, it's such a weird, again, people kind of pull their hair out trying to figure out what leftists, the LGBT alphabet people could possibly have in common with Islam. But I think the important thing to do is, put out what both of those, parties' goals would be in the political realm, and figure out where it overlaps, figure out where the alignment is. And between those two, the one thing they agree on is they want to see a destruction of Christian England. They want to see a destruction of an English England. That certainly overlaps. From the LGBT crowd, it's more of a self-hatred sort of ethos driving it. And from the Islamic crowd, it's more of like what we touched on earlier with the retribution, sort of the vindictiveness. But those two goals align. But we're seeing here maybe that rift could be too large potentially. They're not going to, the Islamic group is not going to go back. We've seen previous stories where the Islamic immigrants sort of throw a fit over when the schools that their children are enrolled in start to implement some of these really left-wing sort of social programs or policies. But generally, I think they're gonna. I think these two together, where they do align, obviously we could see some movement there. We could see some destruction occur. We're already seeing it. But I think it's great that it was documented. But I don't know. I mean, I'm reading here this tweet from the Metro Police. Okay, I see. Yeah, number of protests taking place across London and more. Yeah, in the realm of you can just do things. I think if you're seeing a foreign horde sort of protesting through the street, antagonizing locals, you can just kind of crack down on that. You can prevent that from happening. But yeah, I don't know. It's grim, man. It's grim. I don't think we really see this stateside quite yet. I think
you're getting concentrated pockets, but so on the national level here, what we've got now is the Green Party becoming the second largest party in the polls as of yesterday, and the Green Party are led by a Jewish communist who changed his name to sound more Jewish, but who is anti-Israel, and a Islamic activist who was elected as a councillor last year and shouted, "Allahu Akbar, this is for Gaza," presumably because Allahu Akbar means recycling in Arabic. Yeah. And they're now leading that party as, we are the party for foreign communism against the natives. And they are, because they're the most honest about their resentful ethnopolitics, they're the second largest party on half the polling of reform, because British people are still, outside pockets in the cities, the ethnic majority, and that policy of we're going to steal your stuff and replace you is pretty unpopular. But what you're going to start seeing, especially if this city's built in Texas, if the problem in Dearborn, Michigan gets worse with the videos we've seen coming out of their local city councils there, if Minneapolis continues to sprawl outwards into the Horn of Africa, you're going to see the same phenomena, and you're basically going to see third worldism of the Hispanic El Presidente, or the Idi Amin post-colonial racial resentment variety take over the Democrat Party. And this is why I think actually you're seeing a lot more violence in the Democrat Party. Because don't forget, these people have no impulse control. Like, these guys here on camera didn't realize the political detriment that it's going to have to say we aren't actually co-belligerents. They can't restrain themselves long enough to actually win power to then eject the communists, because they're already forming militias in the streets. This is why there's like talk of civil war in Britain, because we don't think that this powder keg can hold until an election. Over in the States, it's going to be a similar problem. Like, they're already on the "we are going to kill you" train towards conservatives, and that's before someone like Mondami or AOC or some demented other race communist has taken over the party. So yeah, it's not looking good, man.
Yeah, dude, it's grim. It is grim. Well, we're running out of time here, so I think we'll wind down this, pilot, I guess you would say, of our bouncing back and forth across the pond. The closing obviously is they all gotta go. They gotta go home. Enough. We're tired of seeing this. But Connor, dude, thanks for hopping on. Where can people find you?
Pleasure, Tate. Well, people can find me at Con_Tomlinson on X, where we do a bit of posting. They can find me on YouTube at Connor Tomlinson. They can find me on Substack at Tomlinson Talks, and they can read some of my reporting about the fall of my country on Courage Media. And so it is always a pleasure to chat.
It was fantastic. Well, you can find me, Tate Brown, on Twitter and Instagram, or X and Instagram, at Real Tate Brown. We do have an interview, chat, panel, whatever you want to call it, coming up tomorrow with Pat Casey, the legend. We're going to be discussing the good man scarcity. I don't know if you've seen the discourse around this, but yeah, you will not want to miss it, especially if you've had any frustration in the dating market whatsoever. I think it'll be very poignant, very salient. So with that, we're going to close. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you guys later.